We're live out at Modest Brewing, folks. I'm sorry. That was not the game everybody wanted, but it's the game maybe some of us expected. I don't know. Wolves lose in blowout fashion. The season's over. Western Conference Finals are over. Oklahoma City is just a really good team, Ryan.
You know, there's a reason they were the best team in the NBA to start this postseason, and what's scary about them is they just kind of seem to get better.
Yeah.
Tonight's result wasn't all that shocking. You lose 128-126 like you did in Game 4 in front of your home crowd. You had everything going for you. That was the game you needed to win. Really tough to bounce back from a mental and emotional standpoint after that, coming onto the road in Game 5. And Minnesota started slow. They started like a team that was not ready for the moment.
They just started slow. They started like not comatose.
Bad.
They were bad. They were awful.
You know, it looked like we had a chance to play out there at that point. It was brutal to see. I do think there was a big difference in the energy. OKC clearly wanted to end this series tonight, especially with Indiana going up 3-1. They wanted to make a statement. They made it tonight, and you know, I guess we're looking toward the future now.
We are. Yeah, we're not going to spend much time on this game tonight because it was over before it started. Like the Wolves kind of flirted with maybe we could get. I mean, it was down to 24 in the third quarter, and you're like, okay, if you can knock it down to 15, you're the eternal optimist within the eternal Minnesota pessimist. Thought maybe
this is why I love
thought
you,
maybe. Well, I mean, listen, there were people here that you knew tonight that we knew that left. And they go do sad beers. Every time a Minnesota team is eliminated from the playoffs, they go get sad beers, and they're off to get sad beers. And I think they probably expected to be getting sad beers tonight.
You know, like you said, that's the most Minnesota thing
you've ever heard. Most Minnesota thing ever. But they're going to get them. They're going to get them right now. And it's the end of the year for the Wolves. But yeah, there's not much to say about that game in particular because it was not a contest. It was doubled up at halftime, 65-32.
Yep.
They couldn't make a shot. They had more turnovers than field goals at the end of the first half.
14
to 12. I mean,
yep.
They didn't come to play. They looked like they were mentally checked out of this game. And that was after, Ryan, by the way, Game 5, Western Conference Finals last year, home against Dallas. Remember, they were home against Dallas. They were down 29 at the half last year. It's the second straight year where they've just got to the finish line and had nothing else left in the tank.
You know, it was a team tonight that they might have said all the right things, but their actions didn't. And, you know, they say actions speak louder than words, and that was very apparent tonight. Jaden McDaniel started 0 for 6, and the Wolves got so many good looks to start the game, but they just could not get a bucket to fall, and you could just really see that deflate them. While OKC, they weren't getting the buckets to fall, but that defense, the pressure they were able to do to create easy buckets for them, that's the big difference maker for that team, and the Wolves just had no answer, and I think this game, this series really opens up the eyes to what the Wolves really need to not just, you know, get over the hump, but to get to a Game 6 in the Western Conference Finals at this point.
At least the Game 6.
That's all you want sometimes, but it really opens your eyes to what this team needs specifically, and I think it's very apparent, and I'm really curious to see what Tim Connolly does in the offseason. I mean, I think he's one of the better, let's call him decision makers in the NBA. Yeah. I'm really curious to see what he does. He's got a few options out there, but I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a really big offseason for a couple guys.
I should mention right now, anybody who's left in the audience, if you want to come up and ask a question, please come up and do so. Otherwise, we're just going to talk about, the offseason. I think one of the biggest things that I was worried about going into this year, other than the trade they made at the end of camp, right? Like Cat for Randall and DiVincenzo. Like, how's that going to work out? That worked out fine. The biggest thing I was concerned about is they went into the year with their two primary point guards being Mike Conley Jr. and 19-year-old rookie Rob Dillingham, a 37-year-old and a 19-year-old. You'd love to average those ages, but you didn't, and that was a problem all year. I don't think Ant had a true running mate in the backcourt basically all season. This was a year of him kind of developing some of those skills. Maybe that's kind of a step in his process, but that's got to be solved this offseason, however they solve it.
I agree. That's the number one issue I think you go for. I remember when the Randall DiVincenzo trade for Cat first happened. I was a fan of it. I really liked what Randall and DDV were going to actually bring to this team. I thought they had maxed out with Cat, and I'm not even maxed out as much as I almost think they overachieved with Cat. Like, they were never going to be that good again. So I like the move, the financial flexibility it gave them. But you're right. The biggest question is who is going to be the point guard of this team. I know Mike Conley is still signed for another year. Rob's going to be a second-year player, dealt with injuries all year. But at that point, you're a 38 and a 20-year-old. You need a running mate for Ant to basically have someone come in and take the pressure off him as a secondary ball handler and scorer.
We got a question coming to us from the live stream. What's your name, sir?
Yeah, hey, just curious, what are your thoughts on Rudy, the future of Rudy? I mean, I know I'm dropping a bombshell here, but we're throwing a lot of money at this, and you're talking about problems to solve. So where do we go?
Look, you're talking to a guy. So I came.
You're talking to the right guy.
So I used to work for the Utah Jazz before this. So I knew Rudy and his career there. Oh man,
he's got a lot of years left in his contract. They just signed
an
extension. What, middle of this year or last year, whenever it was. It was.
So Rudy signed for a couple more years for some big money. I do think that Rudy has to improve at certain points, but you get to a certain point in your career where you're not going to be much better than what you already are. I don't like the money they've signed to Rudy. They've paid him, but I think he's a very, very valuable piece you have. So that's the biggest thing. Again, the Lakers, hugely valuable. Against the Warriors, hugely valuable. And a series like this, you need more than what Rudy actually can give you. And I think the problem with Finch is that he's almost too loyal. You're paying this guy X amount of money. You have to play him. When in reality, I think their best lineups were with Nas and Randall, going the 4 and 5. So what Rudy does is, unless you really kind of understand the game and watch Rudy play, he brings so much to this team. His screening, he's getting held every time on rebound, so his numbers might always seem as they want, but his defensive ability to just alter shots and make shots so much more difficult is incredible. The problem is that when you have a team like OKC who lives in the mid-range, you can't play drop defense on them. So every time Rudy's in drop, well, Jalen Williams and Shea, they just step right into these smooth jumpers that are perfect for them. So this was a really bad series for Gobert overall. I do think, he would have been great against Jokic, to have that body. There are certain matchups you have to play with Rudy where I think he's phenomenal. This was not one of them.
Yeah, he's got a 3-year, $110 million extension that basically starts next season. So the last one of those is a player option, but I can't imagine at his age at that point he's going to be declining that. So he's kind of the elephant in the room. Like, how is he going to age is a question for this team long term, I would think.
I don't necessarily know how good he's going to age. I don't know how good his game is going to age. I do think the Wolves, I understand why they made the extension, because they didn't want to pay him the $46.6 million they were going to owe him.
Right.
But 3 more years of this is really tough to swallow, especially when, if you think about it, you're looking at OKC, a young team that is most likely going to be the best team in the NBA for the next at least 2 years.
This year, next year, until they start to have to pay guys and their depth takes a hit.
So for that point, you have to look at Rudy like, God, this is the guy we're not really going to be able to play too much when we meet up with the Thunder. But in the regular season, I think he's huge for this team. He eats up big minutes. He's everything you want him to be in certain matches in the postseason. He's great. I do think this is a bad series for him. It's a bad matchup. So to answer your question, there really is no actual answer, honestly, as much as you're kind of stuck with giving him the money, so you got to kind of live with it now. But overall, I do think it's going to be it's going to even out. It's not a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
You can't trade him at this point.
No.
His contract's not tradable, I don't think, unless it's a straight up salary dump or your problem for our problem. And he's not I wouldn't say he's a problem yet either.
No. I mean, Matt Ishbia is kind of a moron, so the Suns might take him. You never know. I mean, somebody might take him. There's always some other, someone dumber enough to take someone, but I agree. I don't think anyone's going to take him.
You're not going to trade him for an asset that helps you as much as he might help you.
Exactly. And he was dominant against the Lakers. He was so good in that series. He was really good against the Warriors. So you see, where you can use him, where you can't. I just think, in a sense, Finch was a little too loyal to Rudy in this postseason. I've seen Rudy completely dominate games and series with the Jazz, and I've also seen him essentially lose you games in series.
Yeah.
So it's hit and miss. It's you got to learn to deal with it and take it. But I think with Rudy, especially as he gets older,
he's going to be 33 next month.
Yeah, you have to have a quick trigger with him in these series. Staying loyal to him too much I think that was an issue. And Quinn Snyder, the old Jazz coach, when Rudy was there, he had this. He was not afraid to pull Rudy, and Rudy would play first 8 minutes of the first quarter, maybe a small stint in the second, but first 8 minutes of the third. If he's playing well, you'll keep him in. If not, you yank him and you kind of go elsewhere. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from this, is that there's certain players who can play in these series, and Rudy was not one of them.
You were on the trade machine in the third quarter because you're bored. You're like, I don't want to watch the game anymore. You're on the trade machine. So we're trying to figure out okay, aside from point guard, or maybe point guard is part of the solution, The biggest problem right now with this roster, I think, is that Ant doesn't have a backcourt running mate. He doesn't have a guy who can take the pressure off of him. They've got good players. Conley's still an effective player at times. They've got some promising young players like Dillingham and Shannon. They've got DiVincenzo and Na off the bench, although we'll see if Na can be re-signed. That's another question. But, like, who is their secondary backcourt star? Like, Jaden McDaniels took some steps, but he's a forward. He's never going to be, like, your secondary, your number 2 scorer. He's never going to be, like, a 24-point-a-night guy. Like, how do they get that while still maintaining some of this kind of flexibility they want?
They need a backcourt running mate for Ant very badly. A player who can have the ball in his hands and score, and also when Ant's on the floor, who can play off of him. The name that immediately came to mind was Darius Garland in Cleveland. With what just happened to Cleveland, they might be looking to make some changes. I think Donovan Mitchell is best served as a point guard, and so it's kind of redundant having 2, 6'2" and under guards in Cleveland. I think that's kind of tough. Darius Garland is the sort of player I would look towards. But, if you're doing Darius Garland, you're probably giving up at least the number 17 pick and Jaden McDaniels at that point.
And some salary.
And some salary. You might have to throw Rob in there. So it's really interesting. But I think Darius Garland or a player like him is exactly who you need. I'm curious to see what San Antonio is going to do. That's another one that's kind of out there for me is, could you package something around Randall for De'Aaron Fox? Randall and Jaden McDaniels for De'Aaron Fox? Because, San Antonio's got Castle. They're going to draft Will Harper.
Yeah.
So that's just as a massive logjam there. De'Aaron Fox as a running mate would be phenomenal. And it's a lefty point guard, so, he knows how to play with a player like Rudy Gobert already. So you have the lefty from Mike Conley, so it's not a big transition because it is a difference catching a lob from a lefty from a righty. Okay. So De'Aaron Fox is one that really makes a lot of sense to me if you're going to go all in. Randall, you have to be willing to give up McDaniels, definitely, which, and honestly, at this point, I think I'd be willing to. If it's Randall and McDaniels, the 17th pick, and maybe something else for De'Aaron Fox, that'd be really interesting. I'd be really intrigued by that.
Is next year the year to go all in? That's the question, because the Thunder are going to be this good again next year. Like, do you need to make incremental steps? Like, Tim Connolly is not a rush the process kind of guy. He is a slow, methodical build kind of guy. That's how they got it done in Denver. That's how they kind of set themselves up with a big window to win. Now, they've only won 1 championship. They've gotten beaten in the conference semifinals each of the last 2 years, so it hasn't quite worked out that way. But he's not the kind of guy who is going to probably take a shortcut. He'll make bold moves when he sees them there, like the Gobert trade, like the Randall for Cat trade. But he is not going to rush the process. So,
no.
Do you view those as shortcuts, or do you view those as process-based moves that they could do, even if they don't think next year is quite their year?
I think you nailed it on the Thunder. You nailed it on the head. The Thunder are going to be really good next year. They're going to be the favorites to repeat. The West is just an absolute gauntlet. I don't know if you make the big trade now. I think you're out there looking to see what you can find. The question is, you want to keep Anthony Edwards happy. That's the biggest thing. So you have to kind of keep Ant happy. Ant knows he needs a running mate. I think Ant needs to get better at playing off the ball specifically. That's going to be the next step in his game. You see that too often tonight where he would get rid of the ball and then he would just kind of still float on the perimeter. There was nothing else around, for him to get involved. So I don't think Conley necessarily makes a big swing unless it's there and available for them. The De'Aaron Fox would be a massive swing, but I'm really curious to see what moves he makes around the margins. Yeah. The thing is, they don't have a lot of assets. It's going to be a huge, huge summer for Terrence Shannon Jr., who I'm a fan of. I think that cat's got some. There's a little bit of dude in him. He's got a little edge to his game. I like him.
And he's already older than Ant, so
which is crazy, right?
He's older than Ant. He's even though he's a rookie. So
yeah. Jalen Clark, we're both not a rookie, but we're both big fans of Jalen Clark.
Yeah,
I think it's a big summer for him. And you have to understand what you're getting with Rob Dillingham. I mean, this rookie season was kind of a waste. Yeah. Is he your future point guard? Is he your Darius Garland type that we're talking about? But the question you have to answer yourself, though, is he worth waiting for?
Well, they moved a lot to get him. They moved that was their last kind of future asset to get him, that pick to the Spurs in like 2031, whatever it was that finally came available. So they obviously saw something in him where they're like, okay, this guy can be a difference maker in the future and give them some financial flexibility. But I don't know. Is he ready next year? How does that shake out? Big question next year, too, is like Randall's got an opt-out. Naz Reid's got an opt-out. Na can be an unrestricted free agent. Like these guys are 3 of their top 8 rotation guys. How many of those guys are here next year and at what price?
Well, the other question of this that, it's kind of the elephant in the room is A-Rod and Mark Lawyer are taking over the team.
Yeah.
The early indications are they are not a team that's going to want to spend heavily in the luxury tax. So I wouldn't be shocked if they're willing to let Nas and or Nah go, just to not spend.
Yeah.
So there's so many things at play here. I do think that Rob, you have to decide what Rob Dillingham's going to be for this team.
You do.
That's going to be the biggest thing. If he is the guy who you think can be that secondary creator with the ball in their hand, that's going to be a great win for the Wolves. If he's not, you have to look at making a move sooner rather than later before other teams figure that out as well.
Yeah, I agree with that because he's always going to be slightly built. He's always going to be like maybe a slight defensive liability, but can he be explosive enough on offense to take that pressure off of Ant? Can he be like half of what you think he's going to be next year so that you can keep progressing down this path? Or do you have to take a shortcut and make a trade at this point?
I agree.
Other question we keep getting from fans is Chris Finch. Now, nothing's going to happen with Chris Finch right now. Nothing's going to happen right now. He's taken them to 2 straight conference finals, albeit disappointing finishes in both of them. And I said to you earlier, like, I think this year's Wolves team could have beaten last year's Dallas team.
100%.
I think this would have been a much better matchup for this year's Wolves team, one that knew how to win in the clutch. A lot of those games last year were super close. Like they could have competed much better with last year's Dallas team, but this was the matchup they had. Oklahoma City was just a juggernaut. They just ran into a buzzsaw. Like they could have played better tonight, certainly, but this was just probably a better team they ran into. But there's the question, like, and I saw someone make this point on X, like, is Chris Finch going to run into a Doug Collins problem at some point where they look at him and say, this guy got us to a certain point, but he's not the guy to take us all the way?
The Doug Collins take is great.
Isn't that great?
That's awesome. That's a little old school there. I really, I like Finch. I think Finch has some more growing and maturing to do. Obviously, like every head coach has to evolve. He's a little Thibodeau-like in a sense right now, where he falls in love with his rotation and he's going to stick to his guns no matter what. I think he needs to become a little more malleable. But also, I think that was a product of this season with had so many changes where it was he didn't really get to see what he had in Shannon Jr. or Jalen Clark, really, or even Rob, essentially, because he's trying to figure out how do I incorporate DDV and Randall into this rotation. So I think, he gets a little bit of a pass at that point. I do think at some point, though, Finch is going to have to prove he can lead this team further.
Yeah.
Because you can make an argument that the Wolves actually didn't overachieve this season. They overachieved last year, 100%, from the regular season to the postseason. This year, I don't really think they overachieved. I think they were kind of status quo in a sense.
They only overachieved relative to how they underachieved at the start of the year.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. You look at everything as a whole. This is a team that, yes, they probably were the second best team in the West, or if not, right there with Denver, maybe the Clippers.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So I think that's pretty fair for where they're at. But this is if anything, if you're gonna lose the Thunder, you want to lose competitively. One game was competitive of the 5.
Yeah,
one game. That's it. You can't have 3 blowout losses like you just had. That's not a good look, and that's something that needs to change. So it's going to be interesting to see what Finch kind of tinkers with his rotation, kind of how he approaches things. But there's no way you can pull the plug on him.
No, I don't think that happens. I think we're a half season to a full season away from that question, though, especially with the new ownership group saying, hey, okay, the loyalty has changed. Tim Conley loves Chris Finch, but he probably also will look at this in a certain way at a certain point, too. So I think Finch had a good season. I think Finch's greatest strength is what got them through these 82 games, which was patience. Yes. I think that's also his biggest weakness in a postseason series.
Yes. He waits too long. This is a game that you had to throw out something different, because I understand not wanting to mix things up in the postseason because it's so late in the year, but what you've been doing previously was not working.
No.
And I think that's part of the reason why he couldn't really test things in the regular season, because of everything that was going on.
Couple social media questions before we go. Aaron Rupar on X wanted to say, he thinks this game took some of the shine off the entire postseason run, that they would get beaten so badly in this game. What do you think?
If you take a step back, beating the Lakers the way you did was impressive. No ands, if, or buts. That was just, for lack of a better line, that was just an ass kicking.
Well, and the Lakers were like a 2-1 favorite when that series started, by the way.
You took out LeBron and Luka, beat them with their own game. That was impressive. I know people want to talk about, well, could this team possibly have beaten, the Warriors with Steph Curry playing or not?
That's the next question, by the way.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? For Ryan Gleason, I'll answer your question right now. Does this team beat a healthy Golden State Warriors team? Yes, they do. I really think so. I mean, granted, this is from someone I've been a Warrior fan since 1999. This Wolves team beats the Warriors with Steph Curry. I really do believe that. They're just deeper. They could have thrown so many more bodies at them. And I think you really saw it wasn't Steph was an issue. Jimmy Butler wasn't the same. Kuminga does not play the way Kuminga probably never even enters the series if Steph Curry's healthy. So I think it's still, if they beat him with Steph, that would have been, impressive in itself. Does it take the sting out of what just happened? No, not really, because your expectations are high. But if you see OKC, who was pushed 7 games by the Thunder, and by the Denver, and you're the Wolves team who you kind of own Denver, you like your odds going into this. And it just seemed like OKC was on a completely different level. They grew up a lot. I think you said it, right?
Yeah.
Like game 5 or game 7, you said, I think, oh, man, I'm worried OKC figures something out within themselves.
Yeah, and they did. Think about this. We were having a conversation at one point, who would the Wolves rather play, Denver or Oklahoma City? Like, that was a legitimate question going into game 7 of that series.
I was wrong.
you thought they wanted OKC because of the experience.
Because of the experience, I would have wanted OKC. I would have wanted nothing to do with Nikola Jokic, which, if you look at this series, if you look at what OKC and happened to OKC in Denver, how good is Jokic?
He's great.
God,
he's great.
To take this OKC team to 7 games kind of by yourself is absolutely unreal.
With Aaron Gordon.
With Aaron Gordon.
And Aaron Gordon out in game 7 was massive in that series.
It was. But, I mean, that was so impressive. But if you're the Wolves, I thought you wanted OKC because of the lack of experience. I was curious the Wolves would be able to test that. They never had a chance. The OKC never gave them a chance.
They were too good in this series. They were too good in this series, and they're probably going to be too good next year. So that's something they have to evaluate and weigh as they consider everything this offseason. But I like your Darius Garland trade machine. I mean, maybe that's what they do. They're going to do their due diligence on all of this. There's going to be more to sort out, obviously, in the days and weeks to come. Probably going to be an OKC Indiana finals if everything's trending that way. That'd be a fun series.
Look, Adam Silver's probably pissing himself right now, thinking 2 tiny market teams.
Not even a direct flight between those two.
Nope,
no,
this is
not even a direct flight.
So he's probably not thrilled about that. But from a stylistic standpoint, oh my God, I want that so bad. That would be so entertaining.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
If you're a Wolves fan right now, the one thing you're probably hoping for is that Chet makes All NBA or Defensive Player of the Year, and Victor gets hurt again, because there's no way OKC can play all 3 of those guys to max.
No.
That's what you're hoping for at this point.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. It's been fun with everybody. Thanks all so much for listening, for watching. Thanks for all the nice emails and comments, for doing all these post-game podcasts after all these playoff games. It's been 15. It was Wolves and 5, Thunder and 5. 5 is a common denominator. We won't be doing any more of these for a little while, but thanks so much for listening, for all the comments, for the great questions, and we will talk to you guys again some other time down the road.